Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to welcome to the show Laila El-Haddad, an award-winning Palestinian author, social activist, policy analyst, and journalist, and Amal Thabateh, a staff attorney with Creating Law Enforcement Accountability and Responsibility, known as the CLEAR Project. Laila and Amal, thank you so much for being on to talk about the case of Leqaa Kordia, who's been held for nearly a year in ICE custody, which is like a concentration camp. Sorry, I have allergies in the winter, so my nose is dripping. But good to see you both on here. So, let's start with you, Laila. Tell a little bit about, because you've been out there in the media talking about the story to people, raising awareness. Tell us about Laila a little bit, Leqaa a little bit, about when she came to the country and what she was doing before even ICE got involved, so people have a more fuller understanding of her.
Sure, and thank you so much for having us on, Dean.
Sure.
Leqaa is a young Palestinian woman who often describes herself as neither an activist nor a leader, and she's extremely humble. She was born and raised in Jerusalem and the West Bank, and was separated from her mother for many years, who had come here to the United States, and she came to join her about 9 years ago. And I have had a chance to visit her in person, and I speak with her pretty regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to get to know her a little bit, and she just says, I was just an ordinary, or I was an ordinary Palestinian woman, someone in her 30s who enjoys taking up different hobbies. I was taking up pottery, and she loves hiking, and she was working as a waitress and also supporting her special needs brother, and they live in New Jersey, where she was based for 9 years. And like everyone else, I like to think, when the genocide in Gaza broke out, she was compelled to action. And largely this was informed, and this is in her own words, not only by her own humanity. She says, Laila, I wasn't doing anything. I don't know why people keep saying, I'm an activist. Of course, I say it was thrust upon her. She says, I was only acting the way that I expect any normal human being to react when the events that we've seen unfold. But I think it also was informed by her own upbringing as a Palestinian who grew up under military occupation, having seen her father humiliated, having had close to 200 loved ones being killed by the Israeli army with U.S. Support and weapons, of course, in Gaza, because both of her parents are from Gaza, even though she grew up in the West Bank. And that also spurred her, I think, to action. But in the end of the day, she says, I'm just an ordinary young Palestinian woman. I usually like to interpret or articulate that as she wasn't necessarily a public-facing leader or activist in the way that many other, individuals that we know of or we've come to know of, Mahmoud Khalil and so on, with which her case intersects and has many parallels. And I think we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, I think, on some level, if you're Palestinian, you're born into political activism just by your very being. Just telling people you're Palestinian for some becomes a political statement, or an uncomfortable statement for some to hear, as I've learned for my entire life. So, Amal, you're the lawyer. Tell us a little bit about what happened from a legal point of view, because I saw, Leqaa was at a protest at Columbia, and then there was some detention or something for like a day, or she was held, then a release, and there was a big span of time. Then ICE calls her in. So can you share so you can make sense, more sense of that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And just uplifting our gratitude. Thank you so much for having us here and for giving us the opportunity to uplift Leqaa's case and her story. So you're exactly right. This started in April of 2024. Leqaa joined a demonstration outside of Columbia University's gates. She joined that protest again, as Laila has mentioned. She's been just so inclined on an emotional, personal, and I think just like on an identity-based kind of level to, really stand up for what's happening in Gaza and to advocate for her people. So she joined this protest in solidarity with the Columbia students who had launched an encampment protest outside of, the gates of Columbia to protest against the U.S. university's complicity in Israel's genocide. And in a recent op-ed, again, she says, although I wasn't a student, I was compelled to participate. After all, Israel, with the backing of the United States, has laid waste to Gaza, forcibly displacing my family, killing nearly 200 of my relatives. So she was caught up in a police sweep of the demonstration, she was arrested by the NYPD and shuttled away to a police station. Very soon after, the charges were dropped in the interest of justice, and nothing came about it. So this arrest is significant because it's what put Leqaa on ICE's radar 1 year later, in March of 2025, when the wave of repression began, when the wave of targeting and attacking citizens and non-citizens alike, those who spoke out for Palestinian freedom, really became the sort of target of our government. So we know that the federal government was working and is working very closely with city agencies like the NYPD to monitor, track, surveil, and punish non-citizen protesters like Leqaa. And so we know the current administration has issued several executive orders calling for the arrest, detention, and deportation of non-citizens who have expressed support for Palestinian rights like Leqaa. So following those orders, the Department of Homeland Security, a sub-agency of ICE called HSI, has been identifying individuals it believes advocated for Palestinian rights on or near college campuses. They collected protesters' names from multiple sources, including arrest lists provided by local police departments like the NYPD. And so Leqaa's name was on one of those arrest lists, and that's how she became a target a year later after her arrest by the NYPD.
So my understanding is she was asked by the ICE to come in or to check in, and she comes in, and that's when they arrest her?
So similarly, in March of 2025, ICE began its surveillance of Leqaa. So Leqaa's story also highlights the sort of continued harmful practice of surveillance of activists, of Muslim community members, as Leqaa, her family, and her Palestinian community members in Patterson were all surveilled. So ICE was looking for Leqaa. They, interviewed neighbors, family members, community members in Patterson, New Jersey, and in other states. And so ICE officers in March showed up at Leqaa's home looking for her. They questioned and harassed her mother, asking about Leqaa's whereabouts. And so when Leqaa spoke with the agents over the phone, they told her that they had questions for her, and they asked to meet with her. So Leqaa at this point was in the process of obtaining lawful permanent residency. She had an approved family-based petition for her green card. And so she thought that this was just a very a routine type of meeting. Something she thought there was a small resolvable issue, or there was a question with her application. And so on March 13th, she voluntarily went to the Newark field office for a meeting with ICE agents. She even had her family waiting outside in a car. They thought it would be like a very quick meeting. And instead, ICE arrested her, threw her in an unmarked van, and sent her 1,500 miles away from her home in Patterson to Alvarado, Texas, where she's been ever since.
She's at the Prairie Land Detention Facility in Alvarado, Texas. So, Leila, can you tell us what are the conditions like? I did read her op-ed that she wrote recently, and even before the medical emergency. What is life like for someone in one of these big detention centers now for nearly a year?
So I visited her back in December, and it took me several hours to get approved to enter while we were waiting. And I went in with a member of the legal team, and though we were inside a closed room, I could tell, and she was motioning to me, that the warden was observing and walking by. And so that's only to allude to the fact that it is obviously strictly monitored, including the conversations, on the phone and when I call her. And, she's a low risk, detainee. This is important to mention. And so the conditions they're subjecting her to, in summary, the conditions in Prairie Land, like many ICE facilities around the country, are truly, truly deplorable. The way that she has described them to me is that it is absolutely filthy. There are cockroaches all over the floor. The facility suffers from severe overcrowding. And so there are far more women, in her case, obviously, than there are beds. And often there are women sleeping on the floors, next to each other. She said, I wouldn't even call what we sleep on beds. For a long time, she was sleeping in something that's referred to as a boat, which is sort of a plastic shell with only a very thin blanket. It's beyond women sleeping on the floor. They're doing so in between sets of loud doors. She said that there's not, to give you sort of perspective, she's an observant Muslim, a person of deep faith, and she says she finds it incredibly difficult to find even a sliver of space on which to lay her prayer mat in order to be able to worship. And even getting that prayer mat, by the way, took several months. And just as in my conversation with her yesterday, she was saying they're pleading to be able to pray the evening Ramadan prayers, Taraweeh, her and there's two other Muslim detainees with her. And they haven't responded to those requests. Beyond that, the food is nauseating. It makes her vomit. This is part of the reason that got her to where she is today. She's literally unable to keep it down. She relies on either the vending machine or the commissaries. She's lost a significant amount of weight as well. And she says to me, Leila, I'm someone who was extremely healthy. I didn't even have Advil in my house. So it's not as though I was someone who was getting routinely sick. This is another interesting detail that she was mentioning. I barely see the light. There's a very small window, very small section of the yard that gets any natural sunlight. And so she's very pale. She had dark circles under her eyes. If you can imagine just a place with, imagining a very sterile kind of place with, I'm just trying to think of how to describe it to you, beyond the overcrowding and the filth. Just stale light, I guess. And she, again, another phrase that sticks out to me, she said she describes it as a hall of sorrows, where she is continually saying, thank God that I have some legal representation and people who love me and care about me and are advocating for my case. But that it is not the case for so many of the women who are locked up here with me. And she described cancer patients. She described a woman who was wheelchair bound. And another one that was pregnant, separated from her husband, who went on a hunger strike and passed out, and nobody knew about these women or knows about these women. She was really sad and solemn when I saw her. And when I asked her why, she said she had just marked her 33rd birthday. And that, in reflecting on that as a person of faith, she said that in the Islamic tradition is the age that people revert back to in paradise. And she thought, and here I am locked up in this ICE jail for doing what, right? For doing something that most of us should be doing more of, protesting genocide, exercising her First Amendment rights of freedom of speech by way of form of protest. And she was very sad, but she said the women around her cheered her up and made her cards and made her promise not to open them until she got out. So that's kind of just an overview of where things stand. And imagine that she's been there not for a day or even 40 days or 2 months. She's been there now for close to an entire year, 365 days, ripped away from her community, from her family, from her brother, from her sister, from her workspace, from everybody that she loves. It's really difficult to have to travel all the way there and then drive another hour from Dallas and get approved to go see and visit with her.
I can only imagine the pain. Amal, I read that she was approved twice for a release, but the government has found a little used provision in the law to keep her. Can you share a little bit about why the court said that she could get bond and be released on bond pending a court date, and how they stopped that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So on two different hearing dates, first in April of 2025 and then in August of 2025, an immigration judge ordered that Leqaa could be released on a $20,000 bond, finding that the government did not provide sufficient evidence to keep her detained, that she was not a danger to the community nor a flight risk. And both times, the government used rarely used mechanisms at its disposal to keep her detained without any evidence, even though the government on the second bond hearing conceded that Leqaa actually did not pose a danger to the community. And so by using something called an automatic stay and a discretionary stay, really, it is just an automatic pause on the immigration judge's order while the government then goes and appeals the decision. So it basically is just a checkbox that ICE fills out on a piece of paper without presenting any other evidence. And they're granted it, immediately. And even though last June in federal court, a magistrate judge recommended that she be released, and actually held that automatic stay, that simple checkbox filing that requires almost no justification used by ICE to block her release, was likely unconstitutional. It's lawfare, plain and simply said. And so that's why Leqaa still remains in detention despite those 2 orders.
I just had an expert on my show last week who's an expert on concentration camps who said that detention centers now qualify as concentration camps, that there's no due process in concentration camps. You're put in there, it's illusory, it's a charade, what the process is. And that's what we have here going on in America. Now they're building bigger camps. You know, Leila, I saw that there was an issue with a health emergency recently for Leqaa. Can you share a little bit about that? And also, I read some of how she was treated in the hospital, which is horrific.
Yeah, and I also want to add, actually, before I respond to that question, one more thing that occurred to me that is, I think, illustrative of the conditions that she's enduring along with all these other women that keeps kind of reverberating in my head, which is she says, Leila, the concept of privacy does not exist here. There is barely, a couple of feet of space for me to lay my prayer mat on, let alone, shower in privacy, let alone change. And of course, this is a young woman who wears and observes the hijab as well. And she's also been denied halal food for the majority of her stay. Of course, we're on the cusp of Ramadan now, which is starting tonight. But with regards to what happened to Leqaa last week, and I'm also going to let Amal maybe weigh in a little bit here. Amal, I don't know if you want to handle this one or you want me to talk a little bit about it.
I'm happy to start.
Okay, and then I'll fill in after. Yeah.
Perfect. So on February 7th, Leqaa experienced a seizure. This is months after, being detained and months of malnutrition, poor conditions at the facility, and really just days after feeling really, really, really sick. Leqaa has never experienced or had a seizure before. Like Leila has mentioned, she, generally speaking, was healthy before being detained by ICE.
Right.
Her family was notified by somebody who was formerly detained with Leqaa that she was rushed to the hospital. And so she was rushed to the hospital after falling, hitting her head, and experiencing a seizure. And for 72 hours, family, friends, legal counsel, we had no idea where she was. We had no idea what her state was. Frankly, we didn't even know if she was alive or dead. We just knew that she had been rushed to the hospital. And in our community, we sent several emails, made several phone calls to ICE, trying to figure out where she was, trying to learn about her state. And ICE said that it was a safety issue to reveal her state or her whereabouts, which was pretty ridiculous because we later found out that ICE revealed to a reporter where she was hospitalized. And that's actually the way in which we found out where she was, through that reporter. And so for those 72 hours, we didn't know where she was. We were really worried. This has been the deadliest time in ICE detention since Trump took office. And so in the entire time she was hospitalized, Leqaa's wrists and ankles were chained as, the hospital staff drew blood, gave her medication. Even when she used the bathroom, she was chained by metal chains. All of her requests to speak to family, to let them know what happened, to let them know that she was okay, to speak with legal counsel, were all denied. So really none of us knew where she was or how she was even doing. And after those 72 hours, she was returned back to the detention center where no one really can meaningfully be expected to recover meaningfully.
It's unbelievable to hear what's going on with our tax dollars as if it's another country. Like you're hearing something in Russia with Putin putting political prisoners. I mean, Leila, I saw in the op-ed that Leqaa wrote, she said the Trump administration aims to send a chilling message. People speak out for Palestinian rights or criticize Israel will face retribution. In your view, is that what is going on?
100%, that's what's going on. And I think her legal status and her situation made her, in a way, the perfect target, made her vulnerable for surveillance, both her and her family, and targeting and interrogation. And the way she describes it is, what she said to me several times is they wanted to make an example of me and indeed silence dissent and send a chilling message to the community, to anybody who might have been on the fence about this. This could potentially be you. You will be disappeared. You will be sent thousands of miles away from your family. You could suffer a seizure and nobody will know where you are. You could die and people will find out after the fact. That's exactly what they're trying to do. And as has been said before, it is not a crime to protest against genocide. It is not a crime to call for a ceasefire. It is not a crime to speak out, to exercise your constitutionally protected First Amendment right, even as a non-citizen, which is something, by the way, that a judge last year upheld and said that non-citizens have the same free speech rights as citizens. And so this is why I think it's so unfortunate that for such a long time, her case fell between the cracks. Nobody really knew who she was or knew about her, when her case shares a lot in common and overlaps with the cases of Mohsen Mahdawi, Dr. Badr Suri Khan, Rumeisa Ozturk, and Mahmoud Khalil, of course.
Yeah, and I've interviewed Mahmoud, and I had his lawyer on recently because of the bad decision by the Court of Appeals. So
Yes.
I mean, people are listening like, why is she there for a year? If Trump wanted to deport everyone quickly, why didn't they just deport her? Like, what is she doing in this facility? Or why don't they release her? Like, it doesn't make sense to any of us that it's 1 year, you're in prison, open-ended, and there's no end in sight. Or is there? So what could you share from a legal point of view?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'll also just add, while we have while her case is pending in federal court, she's also fighting her right to stay in the U.S. So after her arrest, she was immediately put in removal proceedings. So in addition to fighting for her liberty, she's been living in constant fear of deportation. The immigration judge granted Leqaa withholding of removal, which means, she can't be deported. And she's appealing the judge's denial of asylum. But you voice a question that we are all asking ourselves every single day, right? Like, why is Leqaa still in detention?
Right.
Why is she still confined? And I think, what Laila mentioned about really wanting to make an example out of Leqaa, really wanting to scare and silence and censor people. There's a message being sent here, right, with Leqaa's case. Dare to speak out, dare to have political views that are contrary to our governments, dare to be Palestinian, and, this could happen to you. So the current sort of legal, in terms of her legal case, the sort of current status is we're still waiting for the magistrate judge in federal court to, issue her recommendation. She's already issued it once last June that Leqaa be released. But because of the different developments in immigration court, the district judge sent the decision back to the magistrate judge. So it's now sitting on her again, and we're awaiting another recommendation. The judge most recently has given us an opportunity to update the court about recent developments with her health and the medical emergency she experienced. And so that's where we're at currently. We're hoping that, to argue to the judge and to the court that, her deteriorating health, the recent medical emergency really warrants a more urgent release.
I agree. It's
And
shocking.
Amal, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that one of the reasons they often send people so far away from their community, beyond ripping them from their communities, but to places like Texas, where often these cases get drawn out for months and sometimes more than a year?
Yeah, absolutely. It's no surprise that the government has been sending people like Leqaa or Mahmoud to places like Texas or Louisiana, where the forum is more favorable to the government, and they believe they might be able to have a better chance winning there.
Yeah, it's a very conservative circuit, Court of Appeals. The judges are conservative. Last thing, Laila, before we run out of time, is there anything, people are listening, is there anything we can do more to help Leqaa? Just people listening to the show or watching a video.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Every time I think about what she says to me, which is, Layla, these facilities, as you said, ICE concentration camps, they're designed to break us, to strip people of their dignity and of their humanity and of any hope. And with that in mind, it is incredibly important to continue to uplift her case, to say her name, and there are concrete things as well that we can do. But those are incredibly important because, as you yourself noted, you hadn't even heard about her. Well, there's a
Right.
reason people weren't reporting on this, writing about this, posting about it on social media and so on. So that is incredibly important. If you're active on social media, please continue to post about her on a regular basis. If you are active in your community, please have a regular action hour or community letter writing event. You can write letters and send them to her lawyers through Clear, and they will make sure she gets them. Trust me when I say she reads every single one of them. She puts some of them up around the space that she sleeps in. That is incredibly uplifting to her. And in my own experience dealing with family and friends in Gaza, although it's a bit of a different situation, they continuously said to me, please tell people to continue to keep Gaza on their minds. In this case, keep Leqaa on their minds to do and to say and to write, because that hope keeps us going. And then finally, there's a toolkit that Amnesty International has put out. If you just Google Amnesty Toolkit Leqaa, it'll come up. It gives you information, some background information about her case and about concrete items and things you can do, like writing letters to her congressional representatives as well as to the Department of Homeland Security. I know we're kind of icked out by that idea, but trust me when I say these representatives said to me and say to others, I mean, this was a few weeks before she was hospitalized. Well, we're not really getting a lot of calls or letters about her. So tell your communities to do better. So that is actually a really important action item right there. Make those calls. There's some phone banking going on. We have groups, if in doubt or you don't know what to do or you want some direction, feel free to reach out to me or to reach out to Ahmad. We can tell you exactly, put you in the right groups that can help you out. But all of those kinds of things continue to build pressure and hopefully soon will affect change and get her freed.
Amal, is there a website, Amal or Leila, that
Yes,
people can go?
yes. Sorry. And also follow Free Leqaa Kordia. That's at FREE Leqaa LEQAA Kordia KORDIA on Instagram, and that's where we're posting all of the updates for sure. And then post and also tag these officials because they do see those posts, especially if you're on X.
And for letters, if people want to get letters, Amal, do they send them to your offices or do they go through the Instagram, or what do you recommend, or the website?
Yeah, if folks want to send letters to Leqaa, the best way to do so is to send them to our office. So if you Google Clear Project, you'll find CUNY School of Law's address, and you can send them to our office and we'll make sure they get to Leqaa.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for being on and for your activism. And, please tell Leqaa that she has a lot of people out here supporting. I see increasingly on social media now. And Ramadan Mubarak to both of you. And I hope to hear good news. But I'm going to keep following this story. This is very heartbreaking. And we need the elected officials in New Jersey. I saw some of them spoke out about it, but her mother's there. I hope they do more and pressure more.
Great.
Thank you so much, Dean.
Take care. Have a great day.
Take care.